Okay. The journey getting started live streaming on Zoom, but I'm so excited to be here today. Let me see if I need to make sure. Okay, there we go. I'm clear. Okay, so make sure I'm not lagging. Okay, there we go. So my name is Danielle, and I am the education specialist here at the Turning Point Rape Crisis Center. So let's go ahead and get started. Actually, before we get started, as we let people log on, leave a comment down below, or you can think in your head if you don't want to comment, if you are a cat person or a dog person. Think about that or comment it while I'm pulling up the presentation. Okay. Okay, so this is our presentation. We are currently in the 4th week of our ISM series, which goes into oppression and its correlation with sexual violence. And so this is our presentation. It takes unity. So it's a bystander's guide on being empowered and educated, because once we're educated about the problem, we can be the change to fix it and support survivors along the way. So here at the Turning Point, we have a 24-hour crisis hotline. The number is 1-800-886-7273. You can call that number at any time to get set up with counseling, ask questions about getting involved or getting a SANE exam, getting resources, legal resources, anything and everything revolving around sexual violence. You call that number. There's an advocate on the line who can answer your questions and get you set up. Next, we offer counseling. So we have free counseling services for survivors and their friends and family members. So we want to make sure everybody is supported during this time and can help through such a heinous crime. Next, we offer advocacy, which is where we go into the hospital and we support the survivor during their sexual assault nurse examination. So we let them know their rights, we give them resources. We are overall just there to make their experience as peaceful as possible. After such a traumatic experience, we want to surround them with love and resources and everything. So that is advocacy. And then lastly is this, education, where we go into the community in different, sorry, my dog was doing something scary. Education, so we go into the community and on platforms like this, where we go and try and educate about sexual violence, its causes, its risks, and being able to spread awareness, because once we spread awareness and look the problem head on is when we can truly change it and prevent and create lasting change and prevent sexual violence from continuing to be such a heinous problem. So our mission is to highlight the impact of sexual violence on individuals and our community through education programs that foster hope, encourage change, and prevent sexual violence. Join us in the fight against sexual violence. The Turning Point is committed to reducing the prevalence of sexual violence in our community. We firmly believe that for this change to occur, each person has a responsibility and must do their part to prevent sexual violence. So, on to today's topic, elitism. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and preface, if you've watched any of our other isms series, if you haven't, go and check those out after this presentation. But elitism is something that's a bit more complicated. And so you're like, we just talked about classism last week. Classism and elitism are very different, and elitism can bleed into a lot of different platforms. So we're going to talk about how it affects Hollywood, how it affects the workplace, and how it affects school. Okay, so it may seem a little confusing, but I hope I'll explain it well enough to be able to answer any questions that you might have. And if I don't, leave a comment with your question down below and I'll make sure to answer it. So Sexual violence and the isms. So, discussions about intersecting identities, oppression, and social justice have been a part of anti violence movements for a long time. Many movement members have adopted a framework for discussing the continuum of sexual violence within the context of oppression and isms. So, the same attitudes and behaviors that allow for sexual violence in our culture are reinforced and rooted in sexism, racism, ableism, ageism, elitism, and more. There's a theme of intolerance towards the other who is different from the members of the majority group. So, oppression and sexual violence are very intimately related, and that's what this series is all about. So, the definition of elitism is the belief or attitude that individuals who form an elite, a select group of people with an intrinsic quality, high intellect, wealth, special skills, or experience, are more likely to be constructive to society as a whole and therefore deserve influence or authority greater than that of others. So, let's get into the public health model. I put this on every single one of my presentations because it goes into the why. Why are we talking about this? So we have to define the problem, we identify the risk and protective factors, and then we develop and test prevention strategies and ensure widespread adoption. So this ISM series is going over the problem, and then in each session, and some they carry through, we talk about the problem, and identify the risk and protective factors, and then we develop and test prevention strategies. And then we also try and ensure widespread adoption by speaking about this over and over again, and to people who may not have never heard it before, might not have ever heard it before. I'm tongue twisting today. So let's get into the history. So the root cause of sexual violence is oppression in all of its manifestations, including racism, cissexism, heterosexism, ableism, and sexism. Oppression results from people abusing power or lacking consciousness about how power influences their own and others' experiences. For these reasons, we advocate a power conscious approach to addressing sexual violence. So, what does power conscious mean? Simply put, it means paying attention to power dynamics at work in individual, institutional, and cultural systems of oppression, and developing power conscious means that we ask, who is missing in this discussion? Who is centered? Why? Who has the power, both formal and informal, in this system? And then who do social identities influence? Who is heard and who is ignored in silence? And who benefits from the system and who does not? So, early sexual violence laws in America, early sexual violence laws in America were rooted in property law. White men were the only people who could file charges of rape, as rape was considered a property crime. Something that reduced the value of a man's daughter, essentially his property. That was our history, and that's what we were living in. We were property and not a person, and so rape was considered a property crime. I want you to sit with that for a second, because think about how much we moved past that, but how so far we have to go. But additionally, in the time period after the Civil War, white men falsely accused Black men as perpetrators of sexual violence directed towards white women to maintain white men's power and dominance. So more recently, sexual violence laws, specifically the Violence Against Women's Act, emerged during the tough on crime era of the 1980s and 90s, which was also highly racialized. People in that era sought to address drug abuse, but drug laws and enforcement focused primarily on poor communities and communities of color, contributing to the continuation of portraying men of color as criminals. So, in the late 1980s, the Supreme Court interpreted the title of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to include discrimination based on sex as sexual harassment in the workplace. The law recognized sexual harassment as a form of sex discrimination, and it applies to private employers with 15 or more employees, as well as government and labor organizations. Sexual harassment can occur in a variety of ways. According to the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, it says that number one, the victim as well as the harasser may be a woman or man. The victim does not have to be of the opposite sex of the harasser. Next, the harasser may be the victim's superior, an agent of the employer, a supervisor in another area, a coworker, or a non-employee such as a vendor or customer. The victim does not have to be the person harassed, but it could be anyone affected by the offensive conduct. And then unlawful sexual harassment may occur without economic injury to or discharge of the victim. And then the harasser's conduct must be unwelcome. So why are we talking about this? Why are we bringing up sexual harassment and equal employment? Why are we talking about that? Well, when we talk about elitism, we can see those power structures very strongly in work environments, school environments, and Hollywood, as I said before. So right now we're kind of talking about work environment and trying to ensure that elitism doesn't perpetuate oppression and sexual violence on employees. And so these are some protective factors that we have with the EEOC to be able to rectify any situations where you are experiencing sexual violence in the workplace, because that is never okay, never acceptable. And if you are, make sure to go to the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to be able to find legal resources and things that you can do to move forward so that you can have a work experience where you aren't being sexually harassed. So, more than 7,500 sexual harassment claims were filed with the EEOC in 2018. So this was a 14% increase from the prior year. Due to the recent wave of sexual harassment accusations, many states are looking to go beyond federal regulations to prevent workplace sexual harassment. So some states have included sex in their discrimination laws as a protected class. Depending on the specific state, sex protections can cover the prohibition of sexual harassment in the workplace. So other states have explicitly included a prohibition of sexual assault in the workplace in their employment discrimination laws, which is crazy that we even have to put that in the discrimination laws. You shouldn't be sexually assaulting anybody to begin with. But currently, 47 states prohibit sex discrimination. 12 of these states cover sexual harassment under the Protection Against Workplace Discrimination based on sex. 24 other states, including DC and Puerto Rico, explicitly state sexual harassment is not permitted in the workplace. 8 states go beyond prohibiting these practices by requiring employees to provide sexual harassment training in their workplaces. So now, our next point. So in though Title 5, I'm really bad at Roman numbers, protects women in the workplace, one study found that 34% of female employees say they have been sexually harassed by a colleague. AAUW's recent report, Limiting Our Livelihoods, documents the effect of sexual harassment. They found that it threatens women's mental health and physical safety. Psychologists report that sexual harassment can lead to depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. The organizational behaviorists link it to an increased risk of long-term physical health problems. So this isn't leading to just psychological problems. This is leading to physical health problems down the road. And so we have to eradicate this problem. It also erodes women's short and long-term economic security. In AAUW's survey, 38% of women who'd been harassed said it contributed to their decision to leave a job early, and 37% said it disrupted their career advancement. When women decrease their hours or leave their job to avoid a harasser, it reduces their wages and ability to save and build wealth. Next, it contributes to the leadership gap. Women who attempt to avoid their harasser can miss out on valuable on-the-job training and mentorship, which are critical in helping women rise to leadership positions. So 34% of female employees say they have been sexually harassed by a colleague, and of the women who have been sexually harassed, 37% said it disrupted their career advancement. That's crazy. That's literally a third of women. 1 in 3 women will experience this. Do you know 3 women in your life? I can name at least 50, and imagine how many people have been impacted by this and haven't told anybody, because sexual violence is such a crime that survivors end up internalizing. And because it's such a personal crime, a lot of people don't open up about it. So there's so many women in our lives who may have been affected by this and just haven't even told anybody. So sexual violence is divided into 3 categories. The use of force to compel a person to engage in a sexual act against his or her will, whether or not the act is completed; attempted or completed sex act involving a person who is unable to understand the nature or condition of the act, to decline to participate, or to communicate unwillingness to engage in sexual act because of illness, disability, or the influence of alcohol or other drugs, or because of intimidation or pressure, and also abusive contact. So given the dynamics of the working environment and the potential for intimidation based upon power relations between employees and their supervisors or as coworkers, sexual violence in the workplace is a real problem. The United States Department of Justice estimates that 8% of all rapes occur while the victim is working. Wow. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit. Now we're going to talk about private schools and how schools can perpetuate a culture of elitism that allows for sexual violence to thrive. So private school elitism allows culture of sexual assault to thrive. The schools, Kavanaugh, if you remember Kavanaugh and that case and all of that happened, this is kind of a good example of elitism. So the schools Kavanaugh attended while he may have assaulted these women were Georgetown Prep and Yale University. They have much in common. They're both elite, expensive institutions that breed privilege and a culture where students who may be perpetrators feel that their status puts them in a position where they don't have to care about the repercussions of sexual assault. Powerful, wealthy parents can get a student out of almost anything, and at the off chance that a student like Kavanaugh faces legal fees, his parents will be there to cover them. Sexual assault isn't about sex. This is something I say all the time. It's about power. Prep schools and elite universities breed a culture of privilege that encourage power dynamics. Students attending elite schools are told that they are the best of the best academically. This, combined with their financial privilege, gives them a sense of power that they assert through assault. So, during the Daily Free Press FP talk with the BU Brown President Robert Brown Monday, Brown used the high population of the university as what sounded like an excuse. He said that a population of approximately 33,000 students and 10,000 staff, 0 instances of harassment and assault is really a hard number to achieve. But why should we expect sexual harassment or assault to occur at all on our campuses? Having a 0% murder rate, for example, isn't an unrealistic goal. Brown's response demonstrated a lack of understanding for how deeply rape can affect a student's life. It can crush a student from the inside out, potentially murdering the trajectory of their life. After an investigation last year concluded that BU Earth and Environment professor David Marchant sexually harassed a number of female graduate students, Marchant remains on paid administrative leave. If Brown wants to say the university is doing everything it can to combat harassment and assault, we shouldn't be able to point to a blatant case in which the university is giving money to someone who called his student a slut and a whore. That's ridiculous. And we have to be able to talk about these things in the aspect of school because um, whenever somebody goes to college, especially a female or LGBTQ student, they have a higher rate of being victims of sexual violence when they go to college, which is crazy because as a parent, you send your kid to school to gain understanding and to get an education in whatever they're interested in so that they can provide a great future for themselves. And yet, you have to worry about them being sexually assaulted on a place where you're paying thousands upon thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for your kid to go to school, but yet the school can't make proper protective mechanisms for your child, which is unacceptable. So now we're going to switch gears again to Hollywood. So Hollywood certainly has a history of sexual misconduct and sexism, popularly made evident by the pay gap between male and female actresses and comedians. This Hollywood pay gap is reflective of the pay gap that exists in all realms of American life under the patriarchy. But having a few $1,000,000 less than your male co star, it is, while completely wrong, not going to cause one to starve or miss out on their fifth yearly trip to Fiji. Calling Hollywood out of touch with reality is common. But in order for Hollywood and this movement to be more in sync with what's happening, they're going to have to be a lot more intersectional in action and not just in theory. This comes from an article that was criticizing the Me Too movement. Now, we love the Me Too movement because it gave a lot of people a voice to be able to explain and speak up about things that happen to them. So we're never negating that by any means. We want to be able to acknowledge that, yes, actresses, musicians, so on and so forth have experienced sexual violence. And we also want to amplify the voices of the unheard as well. So even among the Hollywood elites, Black women have been shown to not receive the same amount of sympathy or attention when they've accused a man of being sexual predators. Even Lena Dunham, an outspoken feminist who is rightfully beginning to be called out of her hypocritical feminism, defended a man who happened to be her friend against sexual assault allegations from a Black woman. Minorities are frequently sexually exploited and nobody will stand up for them. Dunham apologized for her very questionable victim shaming, but it's hard not to wonder if she really gets it. BuzzFeed wrote an article about R. Kelly, who's been alleged of raping underage Black women in a secret cult. Well, the story got a bit of attention. We saw documentaries and things like that. How much of this happening over years and decades has to do with the fact that the victims who spoke out against him weren't rich, white, or famous. That's something that we have to think about. So, any questions? Well, if you have any questions about anything I brought up, I know that it was a lot of information crammed into a little bit of time. So if you have any further questions about anything that I said or brought up during this presentation, leave a comment down below. You can also always call our crisis hotline at any time for any questions revolving around sexual violence. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you enjoyed this. And if you haven't seen our other ISM series or any of our other presentations, they are always linked in our video section of our Facebook page. So if you want to get caught up or share it with your friends and family members, I always challenge you to share it with 10 family or friends to be able to expand their awareness and help them with their tool belt on standing up for survivors and being a lasting change. If you enjoyed this, I hope to see you next Thursday at 10 a.m. where we talk about, we continue with our ISM series, and I will see you there. So I will see you next Thursday at 10 a.m. Bye.